How has sustainability work with Matt and Nat, and now to founding and working with Bedi Studios?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Great to meet everybody. Um, Sustainability for myself started with the whole vegetarian vegan movement. So that, we don't need to get into that, but that obviously plays a role in sustainability. And that was where the path of Matt and Nat took me. It was based on a business plan, as you said, that I wrote in university, just being a frustrated vegan that wanted stuff that was fashionable, that was design centric, that did not have any animal cruelty, whether it was leather, wool, or whatever. Um, so it started there, and then I realized with Matt and Nat that as we grew it and took the production overseas for myself, oh, I apologize for that. For myself on a personal level, I really want to get back to local production because when I started Matt and Nat, we actually made everything locally for the first 7 or 8 years in Montreal. Eventually, when it got bigger, we had to take the production overseas just to keep up with scale and everything. But that was something that for myself, there was always this yearning to get back to just working with local materials, getting back to local production. So I left after running it for about 15 years. This little voice that told me to get into the industry when I knew nothing about it was the same voice that almost 2 decades later said, okay, it's time to like just make a change and do something different. So I actually left the industry for a little bit, took a little break. My kids were very young at the time, so I got to spend some time with them, catch up on just being away all the time. And then slowly I started researching newer sustainable materials, just really trying to step back and think what would be the next step in sustainability, going beyond veganism and going beyond animal rights and how it tied into sustainability. And I basically started rummaging through scrapyards. The first collection that I did was made out of Air Canada seats and seat belts. I was lucky to buy the interiors of last two Air Canada planes when they still had this black leather that they were using for the business class seats that I didn't know this, but airlines eventually they redo the interiors every couple of decades. They keep the engine and the shell of the plane, but the interiors get completely refurbished and they literally throw it out. So that was the first collection. And then, to this day, we still use seat belts that I pull out of scrapyards in Quebec, but airline leather is something that when you can get it, it's great. It's not something that you can always scale. So along that path, I discovered Econil, which is a fabric out of Italy, which is made out of post-consumer waste, including fishnets and carpets. So the idea now with Bedi is to really create with materials that already exist, whether it's airline seats, seat belts, fishing nets, and whatever else I can get my hands on.
That is incredibly cool, and we will definitely get into more of like the amazing fabrics that you're all using. Um,
Thanks.
because there's so many. I was on the website and there's a lot. It's very, very, very inspirational. Um, Nikki, how about you? Was sustainability always part of your lifestyle and your career game plan? How did you get involved with Fashion Takes Action?
Yeah, thanks. It's really nice to be here. So thanks for having me. I would not say that fashion was a huge part of my life before joining FTA. I was certainly a consumer of fashion and I fell prey to all the promotional emails that landed in my inbox and scrolling fashion websites as a pastime, buying for no particular reason other than for what I now understand is the dopamine hit that causes us to buy a ton. Um, Ironically, simultaneously, I considered myself to be a pretty environmentally conscious person. I was a vegetarian from the age of 13. I ride my bike mostly to get around. I shop bulk to avoid packaging. My cleaning products are natural. My skincare is natural. But ironically, I discovered that the thing that I was doing every single day was something that I'd never really thought about, which was getting dressed. And not only the impact that was having on people and planet, but also the toxins that are involved in our clothes, the dyes and the coatings and finishes on all our clothes. I worked in the cancer space for many years, a decade, and I was pretty paranoid about environmental pollutants, toxic coatings. I may have had a lead testing kit when my daughter was born and tested all of her toys before she could play with them. it was around the time that BPA was being linked to baby bottles. Like I spent a lot of time thinking about this stuff, but I did not know that BPA was on a lot of the clothing that we wear, like socks and sports bras and athletic wear. So, you know, once you dive in, it's hard to find your way out. And then I met Kelly, who's the founder of Fashion Takes Action, and she was looking to fill a role. And I had years of experience, not in this space specifically, but in fund development and partnership development. And so for the past 3.5 years, we've been working together to advance FTA's programming.
Incredible. I love that sustainability isn't necessarily always something that people can consider right off the bat, like, I want to get into this, but still you can find ways to incorporate it into your life and end up focusing on it and integrating it into whatever it is that you're working on. So very cool. Bruce, before becoming the Associate Dean in Fashion Marketing at Humber, you did have quite a few years in traditional retail marketing, luxury. How did sustainability come into your life and how did it shift your journey?
So I've been thinking about this as the other panelists were answering. That's a really good question. I'm not quite sure exactly sort of when it hit. I do remember in doing my master's, doing a lot of study around textiles. And I would take it back probably to realizing how much oil was being used, non or man-made fibers. And that's probably where it started. I also think that, you know, part of it also was from being a poor student at the time and having an affinity for luxury goods. So I discovered thrifting, consignment shopping quite early. I don't think maybe I linked it to sustainability at that point, but that was definitely kind of my first foray into being a more sustainable consumer. And then from Humber, you know, I remember even when I was my student's age now, talking about sustainability, talking about the problems within the fashion industry. And I'm gonna say we didn't really do anything about it, my generation. In fact, it got worse. So now when we're talking about sustainability, we really make an effort to bring it into every class, every classroom, every lecture. So we're have that sustainability lens on everything that we're teaching. So the more you dive into it, the more interesting it becomes. The students, you know, they're very conscious of it. They're very conscious of climate crisis and they really want to fix the problem. So it's really empowering, enabling them to be that voice of change that I think we knew about, but were unable to act on.
I love that. And I also love that you mentioned things that you were doing that you didn't realize at the time were sustainable. I think it's so important that we all take note of those things that our parents might have passed down to us or grandparents, like certain practices that were just better. Acknowledging those things is really important. And I think key to like our journey in sustainability and going backwards sometimes as well as going forwards. So thank you all for the great work that you're doing. Let's actually dive into a little bit more details about each of your work. So Inder, you had mentioned some of the really cool fabrics that your brand uses to make the clothing that you make, such as Eco-Nile and seat belts. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you find these materials, what you're looking for, and just a little bit more about the manufacturing process in Canada? I imagine it can be quite hard to keep it local.
It is probably one of the biggest challenges for what I do is to keep it local, just because a lot of students that are graduating from fashion don't necessarily want to jump on a sewing machine. They want to design, they want to work in fashion marketing. So the tailors and the sewers that work with us tend to be quite elderly, and they're not always from Canada. Like they're Canadian, but they're might have been here, come over in the last 5 years or 10 years or whatever it is. But there's we're gonna have to figure out something to keep this going in terms of just the getting students excited about actually making and manufacturing and all that stuff. So there's definitely a shortage of sewers, and that's always stressful, but we always find a way to kind of get things done. And then in terms of using the materials, I was blessed that after I left Matinata, I had the luxury of time. So I spent 2 years in research and development, just looking for different materials, playing with things. It took me 6 months to figure out how to stitch a seatbelt. They're so rigid and dense that every time you stitch them, it just pushes out materials. So doing things like that, and then even outerwear, it's something that I always wanted to do. My specialty was in bags, but I felt that there was a gap in outerwear, and to date, it's still our biggest selling category. But just perfecting a hood took me another 6 months. So it's really, it's, our brand is not loud, it's not trendy, it's not very bright and colorful. It's very minimalist, basic, but with a Japandi aesthetic. So the attention really goes into the detail, the lines, the hardware. The zippers are all from Japan. The installation's made in Belgium. It's one of the few installations that's not actually made in China or Vietnam. So just looking at all these different aspects of every product, whether it's a jacket or a bag, is a big part of the process. So a lot of R&D. And then in terms of materials, I'm lucky that there's mills like Econil that have this technology to pull out fish nets from the ocean, break down the pellets, and then convert this into this fabric that we use. And the other great thing about that fabric is it's nylon, because a lot of fishing gear is made from nylon. So it's super resistant. It's the equivalent of ballistic nylon that's used for luggage by Tumi and other companies. So the idea is to not only use trash, which is pretty much what I do, but also to make it in a way that it's going to last for ideally generations. So I give a lifetime guarantee on everything that we make, all the bags and the jackets. And yeah, we also have a second life program where we actually take products back, refurbish them. Either they're sold on the website or we give them to a local charity called Dans la Rue, which supports kids that are living on the streets of Montreal. So the idea is that everything should keep turning. Like there shouldn't be an end to any product that we create. That's
so incredible. One of the things that I find really hard about determining whether a brand is sustainable is that I mean, and this is sort of I guess the challenge of being in the real world, in real life, is that it's hard to do all the things. So to find a brand that is ticking all the boxes of like, it has a take back program, it considers the end of life, it considers the raw materials, it's considering wages, it's considering local, like there's so many boxes that you're ticking. And I find that really cool. And one of the other things that I wanted to touch on with you and ask you about is the importance of certifications, because a lot of times brands will have on their sites like all these sustainable claims, and I'm always like, oh, this is sounding good, this is sounding good, and then I'll do like further digging and further research and realize that it's just like kind of a sham. And so certifications are one thing that can help people really just know right off the bat that, oh, there's a third party that's verified these claims. So you recently have received the B Corp certification. Congrats. Can you tell us what that means and why it's important?
I'm going to take that congrats because it was so rigorous. I mean, this process took us almost a year. It took about 11 months. And I can't say that I did all the work. Ellen, that works with us, who takes care of our marketing, she just like the amount of hours that she put into this, I had to add them up, was crazy. And you know what, as it should be, because then at least you're feeling happy and content that these guys really ask the right questions. They go in really deep, really granular. So it's a very long process. It's a lot of back and forth, but I can't say that everybody recognizes it. Like we have a boutique in Montreal in the Mile End. So not everybody that comes in knows what B Corp is. I feel that more people in the US know what it is, but it's getting more and more recognized. I mean, it was something that was a big win for us. Just it actually forced us to even look at some things closer, that because no brand is perfect. I mean, as much as we try to be 360, there's always things you're improving upon, whether it's design or finding this new, more sustainable fabric that just came on the market. So it did force us to kind of look at certain things like recycling the rainwater that's falling on the roof, or other things where you're like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, why not?
So it's a very full circle, sort of all-encompassing certification. Does it also include considerations of like employment and people, or is it mostly on the environmental side?
No, it's really, they touch upon everything. It's community, it's fair wage, it's working conditions, it's even the neighborhoods where your employees are residing, the neighborhood where the atelier is based. Like it really gets granular. Reporting, transparency, like it's it's on a lot of different levels, which again, it's a good thing. We're also rated by Good and You, which is based out of Australia, which is also great. But B Corp just takes it to a whole other level for sure.
Yeah. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And
Thanks.
thank you for considering all of those factors and continually trying to improve. Nikki, can you tell us a bit about, for those who don't know, what is Fashion Takes Action? What's some of the work that you do, and including the youth education component?
Okay. Okay, so FTA has been around for 17 years. So from way before anyone was talking about sustainable fashion. It started with a green fashion show, and it had such a great response, mostly from small designers that were what we would call slow fashion designers, that were doing their best to be sustainable, and they needed support, and that's where Kelly came in, and it began as a members-based organization. But it was around the time of the Rana Plaza factory collapse in 2013 in Bangladesh, when 1,134 garment workers were killed, and there was a prominent Canadian brand that whose products were found in the rubble. And I think that's probably when the bigger brands started paying attention. And obviously the climate crisis is also forcing brands to pay attention. Fashion industry is responsible for about 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which is more than flights, worldwide shipping, and rail combined. So obviously things need to change. And so FTA today is working to advance sustainability in the entire fashion system, which is quite unique. We work with all the people who make, sell, buy, wear, resell, and dispose of clothing eventually. So we work with the whole fashion system. And a lot of that work is rooted in education, whether we're, talking to consumers who, like I was, didn't know anything about what I was doing, and should have been more aware of, to people who think they're aware, but then still have questions about some of the claims that are out there. We're trying to make that clearer. And we're working with the industry to help ensure that those choices become easier to make, because they don't always say the wrong things on purpose. They just don't entirely understand the claims they're making and what they imply. So we're working with the businesses. We believe in progress over perfection. Every step towards making it better is progress all the same. I mean, sustainable fashion in and of itself doesn't really make sense, because just by virtue of making a product, you're having an impact. But obviously we do need things. So trying to do our best, like Inder's doing, reusing things and making the things that we do buy as sustainable as they can be. And on that note, we've been working a lot in circularity over the past about 7 years. We ran Canada's first textile recycling feasibility study, which looked at post-consumer textile waste, which is all the stuff that we don't want anymore that ends up in landfill, and discovered that 500,000 tons of textile waste ends up in Canada's landfills every year. And the reason that's sort of important is because as Canada isn't a huge market, we don't have our own data. And if we don't know our data, then we can't do anything about it. So from that point, we worked with the support of Environment and Climate Change Canada. We ran a textile recycling feasibility study, and we worked with Canadian Tire to develop a product out of 100% polyester garments, post-consumer garments, so mostly sportswear that was dropped off by consumers that they didn't need anymore at Sport Chek stores. And then Goodwill sorted it and made sure it was 100% polyester. Then it was shipped to be shredded and needle punched and made into like a woven felt product that then we worked with the Canadian Tire development team to turn into a laundry hamper, which instead of what is typically done with textile recycling is downgrading into wipers and rags, became this consumer-facing product that had a higher value. So if we can prove the business case for that, then we can hopefully see that scale. It's very expensive to do, and you do need to do it on a large scale to make it feasible, but it's a start, and it's getting people thinking. And we had a group of stakeholders, a lot of brands that followed along so that they could learn all along the way and hopefully try to replicate it for themselves at the end. And then that led us to forming the Canadian Circular Textiles Consortium last year, which is now over 100 stakeholders from across the value chain who are all working together to accelerate circularity across the fashion system.
That's incredible. And thank you for touching on the steps of what it took to get from textile to recycled laundry hamper. Because I think a lot of times people hear like recycling and they think something simple, like, oh, it's simple. You just take it and it becomes something else. But even to just hear how many steps it had to go through, how many hands had to sort it, touch it, make sure it's this, figure it out. It's more complicated than it seems initially. But I love that this work is being done. It's being done in Canada and that there's hope. I love hope. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Bruce, you have a lot of experience working with students. And as we say, you know, children and youth are the future. So we're leaving things to them as much as we are, you know, trying to create a world that is great for them to work with. But what specifically, in terms of messages around sustainability, do you chat with your students or try to impart into the students?
So with our fashion business students, I think one thing that's really important from our standpoint is to create that sustainability mindset within them when we're looking across the entire supply chain. So, you know, we look at something like textiles or the manufacturing process dyes. I mean, they know about this stuff, but when we're talking about, you know, shipping or from the purchase, packaging, and utilization, and then even how are people going to dispose of product, you know, these are things that they might not initially think about. So we try to put them in that mindset to be thinking about sustainability all the way from fiber to the end of life of a product. And then what does end of life look like? Like, I mean, initiatives like what Nikki's doing with Canadian Tire, you know, there are projects like that around the world that is taking waste and creating something new from it, which is really exciting and such a great opportunity. And that is something that students, you know, look for as you know, a future endeavor, a future looking, something that's really going to be impactful. So it's getting them to look at the whole process. A lot of it they already know coming in. Let's teach them about the sustainability of the part that they might not have been given thought to already, or they might just not be aware of yet. And then also, you know, when they're going out into the industry, to make sure that they're taking that mindset with them. So the companies that they're going to be working with in the future, they can bring that lens, they can make those recommendations, they can improve. You know, we're a business school. I sit in the Longo Faculty of Business. So, you know, the money part is important to us. The profit part is important to us. We do have to sell product, but that doesn't mean that we can't do it in a sustainable and responsible way.
Can you tell us a bit about the project that your students are doing or did with Salvation Army?
Sure. So we have an annual fashion show at Humber. We do not have a design program. So often we will do something like highlight a Canadian designer, work with a brand for the clothing. So this year, we worked with the Salvation Army to do a thrifted fashion show, completely student-led, student-driven. They chose a very avant-garde, sort of dark theme. I'm going to say I was a little bit worried about it when I heard the theme. I don't think the Salvation Army has any black clothing left. I think it's all now at Humber. But it was quite amazing. They, you know, they brought their own clothes. They went to their closet. What are we not using? They donated those clothes. If you donate clothes, you get a 20% off coupon. The styling team went in. They did a couple of trips, spent some hours in there pulling stuff. And then they just styled it. And it was really quite amazing. And I think really showed the audience that, you know, thrifted clothes you know, there might be a stigma to it that they're out of fashion, or they're not, you know, not stylish, that they're not in good condition, that you can't make, you know, a forward look out of them, which I think they really dispelled. It was quite amazing how they styled the thrifted clothing. You know, safety pins can do a lot. You know, some details, they were spray painting, they got really creative with it. So it really, I think showed not only them, but the attendees of the show what the possibilities are. And, you know, I think they brought in some other sort of quotients. You know, they are students, they don't have a lot of money to spend, especially now. You know, the students are working a lot, school is expensive. But you know, fashion students, they're a creative bunch, and they love clothing, so I thought it was great for them to be able to really highlight and show the possibilities of thrifting. And then I think partnering with a nonprofit like the Salvation Army thrift stores also gave it a sort of a different dimension there as well. We weren't just, you know, supporting a big brand or, you know, new clothes, current season clothes. They were really, you know, creating something forward looking. So it was very, if I can say this, it was very successful. I was blown away by the creativity, and I think the messaging from it was really important as well.
I love that you mentioned that, you know, your business school, profit still has to be a part of the conversation. And a lot of times when we talk about sustainability, I think people's mentality is that it has to be people over profit, which I understand as a statement, but the world that we live in, we all still need to make the dollar. But I think it's really cool to start imagining different ways in which, you know, instead of profit coming from this like linear system of constantly like taking, making, and then dying, figuring out how we can add value to end of life. So things like the secondhand market, all of that, and the recycling of things, and figuring out how we can keep the value circulating while still generating profits for us all is really cool. So,
and a lot of times sustainable clothing or green clothing is might be cost prohibitive for some people. But this is another way that they can still live a sustainable lifestyle within their own income bracket, which I think is amazing too. It can transcend all socioeconomic, the entire landscape. So I think that's an important point as well.
that actually leads perfectly into what I wanted to talk about next, which is actually some of the challenges that come with being in the sustainability space. So Inder, for you in particular, I know you already talked about the challenges of keeping things local and scalability. I wanted to know if you feel that there is a challenge in terms of people's perception of the cost of the goods that you're making and how you overcome that barrier.
There's definitely a challenge, and it's not just from students or I remember I was doing an interview with a journalist, and they asked me, okay, so why are your coats so expensive? And I just looked at them, I was like, really? I mean, you're a journalist, like you don't know what things cost, whether it's here in Asia, whatever. And it's a lot of what we do is educating people, and a lot of it is just in regards to economics. And it's, you know, it makes sense. Not everybody understands economics, but when you start looking at it, things from an economic point of view, and I'm explaining to a customer that you buy a super puff from Aritzia that costs you, I don't know what they go for, let's say $200 or $250, and you buy it every year or every 2 years, over the course of 10 years, you're going to spend at least $2,500 versus we sell a coat for $800-900 where they're literally the best materials in the world. They come from Italy, Japan, Belgium. I wish they all came from Canada, US, but not all materials are made here, which is fine. So we try to have this balance between getting them close to home, but also materials that are going to last a very long time. So you're buying this jacket for $800-900 that's guaranteed for life. But even if you only keep it for 10 years, it's still a lot less expensive than this other coat that you bought that's going to last you a couple of seasons before it starts ripping or falling apart. And you're getting a premium product. I mean, you're getting something that'll actually keep you warm till -30. It's just, there's a lot of love and passion that goes into this product versus something that's mass market. So a lot of it is just educating people on really getting them to understand that there's that expression, I can't afford to buy cheap. And it's making them realize that if you're buying the same thing over and over again, you're actually in the long run spending a lot more money.
I love that. It's all about communicating the value to people and figuring out like how do we start shifting the conversation so people's values shift a little bit, because I totally agree with you. I myself am guilty of like sometimes buying, like, why do I have 5 winter jackets when I could have one, literally? And so it's shifting that mentality of going, do I really need to have that many? Because that many is equivalent to the one good one that I could have forever. So communicating those values and continuing to figure out how we shift those conversations is really important, which leads me to a question. Nikki, yeah, what?
I just chime in because I forgot to touch on the education that we do with youth. So we have a program called My Clothes, My World, where we are teaching kids as young as 8 about the impacts of fashion as it relates to broader climate issues, but through a lens of something that they can relate to because they get dressed every day, but that's fun for them. And one of the activities that we do is like to have them look at a supply chain and put it in order, and then look at the cost of something and think about how many hands touched that item and how much it should cost. So I like to think that we're educating that next generation so that when they end up at Humber or when they come to work for you, Inder, like they should have a sense of that, or when they're buying from you, like we're trying to hammer that home that like anything that costs $10, like how did everybody get paid to make that?
Yes. So important, and so important to start younger than realizing when you're older and then having to unlearn everything. That's amazing. In the essence of time, I would love to wrap up on a hopeful note. So I just have one last question for each of you that hopefully we can try and get to in a shortened time frame. For Bruce, how have you seen the sustainability conversation shift throughout your years, and what gives you hope for the future of sustainable fashion?
I think what gives me hope is that it is a more robust conversation. Even from when I started at Humber, like we used to have a class in ethics and sustainability. And when I look at our program now, we talk about sustainability in everything from human resources to visual merchandising, supply chain management. So again, it is that mindset. It's always having to have that lens on, but then also acknowledging, it's always improving. It's always moving forward a little bit. You can't change everything. You're never going to be perfect at sustainability. It's that Japanese notion of Kaizen, always just trying to get a little bit better, make that conscious decision. If we can just get people in that mindset, then, that's the hope. That's really the goal. And I see it in the students. I see it in the dialogue. I see it when they are handing in projects, giving presentations, that they are thinking about that. They acknowledge it and they talk about it. So, I think we'll always have challenges, especially in the fashion industry. There will always be challenges, but I think the more people who can get into that mindset, the better it will become. Costs will come down. The more people that go through this mindset, the cost eventually will come down. And I think that's really hopeful. I think that's very hopeful.
Definitely. Inder, to anyone listening who might want to become a designer someday, why would you encourage them to do so in a sustainable way, or how would you suggest that they do so in a sustainable way?
I mean, first of all, I think everybody at some point, if they can, should be an entrepreneur. I think it teaches you a lot about yourself. But doing it in a sustainable fashion, it's just it's where we need to go as a society. I mean, I think that's more obvious now than ever. And it's as to Bruce's point, it's really encouraging to see that from an educational level. You're seeing more and more courses that talk about sustainability. We do artisanal shows across North America. I'm actually leaving tomorrow morning for one in Seattle, and it's nice to see that these shows are popping up everywhere, all over Canada, the US, Europe as well, where people are just coming out to buy locally made goods from local designers that are using premium materials, and they're willing to pay for it. And these shows are packed. Like the one we do in Toronto, one of a kind. I mean, they get like 100,000 people over the course of 11 days. So there's really this push to buy local, to buy stuff that's sustainable. And I think as an aspiring designer, there's never been a time where you had more access to materials that are upcycled, recycled, having a network of other designers that are doing the same thing, even having help from whether it's the government or different organizations like FTA that are really encouraging you along your path. So yeah, it's a good time to be sustainable. Beyond it being something necessary for the world, it's also a good time to be sustainable from a business point of view.
I love that. And Nikki, in the world of sustainable fashion, as we've already seen, things like vintage and upcycling and thrifting and the secondhand market is definitely on the rise, which is great news. What other areas of opportunity do you see for fashion? For example, I know Fashion Takes Action was at the Juno Awards, working on greening the Juno Awards. So what areas of opportunity are you looking forward to and excited about?
I think there was still a lot to do in the education space. I think, you know, definitely thrifting and shopping secondhand is picking up pace, shopping vintage. But I think there's still like a consumer behavior piece to that where, you know, I have a teenage daughter with 25 or more pairs of jeans in her closet, but she only wears 2 or 3. She, you know, thrifting is a hobby, it's a pastime. And so I think that we need to apply the same lens we do to the mainstream shoppers. Like, do I really need it? Will I wear it? It's great that it's in your home instead of in landfill, but let's just stop, like change the mindset of we just don't need as much stuff as we have. Let's slow it down. Let's think about durability. Let's think about where you're going to wear it, who you can share it with when you don't want it anymore. All those things, rental, swapping. There's so much more to it than just like buying secondhand.
Yeah.
So I think it's about education, and there's still lots of room to be doing that.
Yeah, and on that note,
Yeah, and on that note,
we have an event coming up on May 5th. Do you want to share with the audience what it is and a little bit about it?
Yeah, so for the second year, we are hosting Remode in Toronto at Stacked Market. It's on May 5th. It will be emceed by the incredible Lindura, who she has a new title. So it has basically 3 main components. There's a vendor marketplace with no new clothes. These businesses are all focused on the 7 R's, which are reuse, repurpose, repair, rental. I missed one, but I'm not going to go into it. They're amazing. We had, and on Inder's point, like there was twice as many vendors as we had spots that applied to be part of it. So this is definitely a growing area, and I'm so excited by the ones that we're going to be showcasing there. There will be an area for talks, so that's ticks the education box. We'll be, you know, clarifying some things around certifications and greenwashing, talking about how to take care of your clothes. Like there's no point in shopping secondhand and buying something that's silk if you're never going to hand wash it and you're just going to ruin it because you don't take care of it. And then there is also a clothing swap. So that's going to be hosted by Vicky Hall if she shops swap, and we're, you know, helping that swap thing go mainstream. We already have close to 600 people registered, so it is free to attend. I can throw the link in the chat. It's going to be great. Yeah. And if you're not in Toronto, we hope it will be coming to a city near you soon, next year maybe.
Thank you all so much for your time. I want to open it to audience questions. I guess, Lindsay, I don't know if you've been paying attention to chat. I can't multitask, so.
Yeah. So I think we have one question. Thank you, Nikki, for putting the link in the chat. Just reiterating that that link is in there now. So I think if you have a question, I'm just switching the view so I can see the gallery. And if you have a question, can you raise your hand or pop it in the chat, and we will just do a quick couple of questions. So I'll just open that up now. Anybody? Well, okay, so we have one from Lindley. Is there a way for consumers to identify which brands are sustainable? I don't know if anybody wants to take that one on.
Oh, and Lindsay, I'll just chime in just to, sorry, to clarify my question. Like we hear a lot about how brands like H&M are doing resale, or they're like investing in recycled water bottle clothes, like, but it is like one of the biggest fast fashion brands out there. So is there like, is it looking for B Corp brands? Are there any tips and tricks that you have when you're shopping?
I can take that. Yeah, I mean, the certifications that we touched on earlier, there's the GOT certification for organic, there's the B Corp certification, which really covers, like, runs the gamut in terms of making sure that a company is doing what they say they're doing. There's Okotex, there's Blue Sign, there's Fair Trade, looking for those third parties that can verify claims. FTA is actually being funded by the government right now to do a study on greenwashing. We surveyed over 2,000 stakeholders across Canada, and we'll have the results of that coming out in the fall. But it's really about, like I said before, like not every brand knows that the things they're saying aren't right, but how it's being interpreted is really an issue. So there needs to be more regulation so that we really understand what we're buying. For instance, like a recycled polyester item is not textile to textile. It's plastic bottles turned into a top, which is great that we're using plastic bottles and turning it into something else. But the issue, if you're only going to wear your clothes on average 7 or 8 times, that plastic bottle could have lived on and on and on as a plastic bottle recycled into a plastic bottle again. So like stopping and really thinking about those materials. So in short, you need to do digging and really work hard to figure out what you're buying. There's no clear answer at the moment.
Fair.
Yeah, if I may, I think it's just asking a lot of questions. I would say most of the brands, major brands that we're aware of that talk about sustainability it's a lot of BS. It's a lot of greenwashing. Even some of the materials that we look to work with that present themselves as sustainable are sometimes they could get certified, but not necessarily be sustainable because they're able to tick off a couple of boxes and the requirements, but you just got to ask a lot of questions and dig as deep as possible. I would say even some of the brands that are made locally, if the materials are coming from China, Vietnam, where either there's no certification or the certification is all bullshit, then it kind of defeats the purpose. So got to dig.
Mm-hmm. I think we had a question from OWIT, but I'm not sure if that person will ask, so I'll share. I know we had mentioned there's been a lot in the news lately about IKEA and the taxation on goods that are basically being resold, and them fighting for no tax on resold items because technically you'd be paying HST twice, so 26% tax. Do any of you have any thoughts on that or insights on what you feel about this?
Oh, I'll jump in here.
Okay.
I like it in theory, but what happens if you're buying a secondhand Birkin bag? I think there needs to be more investigation and some kind of rules around that. I think if you're shopping at Salvation Army thrift store or buying from a local, producer at a market, it kind of makes sense. But, there's luxury items too. I'm less convinced that those should be subject to be HST free. That being said, I'm sure that the volume at lower prices is higher being sold. So maybe that's a trade-off that is worth making if it's going to stimulate a more sustainable mindset amongst consumers and push them towards that. But I also do think that, you know, if you've got a responsible producer who is doing everything, then that kind of maybe pushes the consumer away from maybe purchasing those products. So I think it's a really interesting notion to discover. I think there's, as a blanket statement, I think there's some problems with it. But anything that's going to get people to think more sustainably in their shopping habits can't really be a bad thing.
Yeah. Nikki, did you have a thought?
Well, actually, I was at a conference yesterday hosted by IKEA, and so they were talking about this campaign to get them to remove the HST on secondhand items. Which in theory, like, it makes sense, and I've questioned it before, like, why when I'm shopping on Poshmark am I paying HST? And in that instance, I still question it. But from what I understand, HST is really more of a business function, making sure that a business is functioning above board, so that the CRA, if you're over a certain threshold of income, that you should be declaring your taxes. So it really has less to do, I think, with the product that you're selling and managing the business and making sure that they're legit. So I think it just needs more investigation on how it all works, because I'm not a tax lawyer and I don't really understand tax.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting dialogue and it's important conversation to have, because to your point, when you go on Poshmark or you go to Value Village, you do think that, but there's a lot to unpack there. But I think it's the genesis of the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lindura, I just had a question for you. Can you tell us a little bit about plastic-free TO quickly? Just, I know that that's an initiative of yours and something you've started. Yeah, you're on mute.
Thank you. I forgot. Plastic Free Toronto started as an initiative of myself and my sister when we first really got into sustainability in a very active way, and we wanted to find community and share what we were learning. We were basically trying to eliminate single-use plastics from our lives, which is way harder than it seems. And it's since grown into like a social awareness page. So we now don't do as many like in-person events as we used to. We used to host a lot of like in-person things, which COVID kind of killed. But we've kept the community going as a way of still educating on certain topics that need attention. A lot of times it's encouraging people to engage in political decisions that are happening. So recently, like Toronto has passed some bylaws to deal with single-use plastics, and they're still in talks to continue to figure out how we continue to shift in the right direction. And so we're trying to spread the word, make sure people know about that sort of thing, and figure out how we can all help, not just in our individual actions, but in making sure that we're speaking up for those larger changes that will shift things on a quicker scale. So that's Plastic Free TO now. And who knows, maybe we'll have another reiteration soon, since neither of us really live in the city anymore. But yeah,
Ontario.
yeah, I'm in Ontario. My sister's now in Halifax, East Coast, Nova Scotia. So I still love being part of that community though. And I love just learning and sharing. It's so hopeful. It gives me hope.
Yeah. Super important. I just want to say how much I appreciate everything that you are all doing to move the needle and create conversation and space for this discussion. You know, we're so privileged to have spent, you know, the evening with you talking about these important initiatives and the things that you spend your time on. The world is a better place because of it. You know, so your perspective is really valued. I will add that if you want to catch up with Lindura on a different screen, Sullivan's Crossing airs on April 14th on CTV. So catch her there. Very exciting. We're happy for you. Brava. And yeah, the link for Remode is there. Check out Bedi and Bruce. Thank you for all of your work at Humber for the fostering the next generation. FGI Toronto is having our communique on May 22nd. We're looking forward to hosting that. It's a 30-minute presentation of coming and future trends, fashion trends. And it's an incredibly informative session. So we look forward to hosting some of our community again on May 22nd. We'll be sending out an email about that. Thank you all for your time, and we hope that you all enjoy the rest of your evening. We hope to see you again. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.